Hello, English 102 students. Today I want to talk to you about evaluating sources. This is something that you may already be very well practiced at, depending upon your experiences in English 101 and other other classes in high school. But it's so important that I want to spend a little time reviewing some basics about evaluating sources for college research. So let's assume that our research question is this: what are the cognitive benefits of video games? I like this question for a class like this for a few reasons. First of all, it leads to multiple possible answers. This is something that's still being investigated, and so there is still a lot of discussion around this. Experts have published research on it. It's not just something that exists as a conspiracy theory or anything like that. It's actually the subject of scholarship, and that's another good quality for a research question. And also, as a researcher, I'm open-minded about it. I don't have such a strong bias about it myself that I'm going to limit the ways that I look for sources or the kind of sources that I'm looking for. I'm honestly curious about multiple possibilities for this question. So with those things in mind, we're going to talk a little bit today about scholarly sources and general sources, but I want to come back to this and look at the sources that I asked you to look up this week in about cognitive video games. So here's the first one: playing video games is good for your brain. You can see that this was published in the Washington Post. If you don't know what the Washington Post is, remember that you can go to, scrolling down to the About Us section and look at that, or you can do a Google search of the Washington Post to find out more about what it is. It's a mainstream, well-regarded American newspaper. When we look at this source, we can see a little bit about the author. Mark Griffiths is the director of the International Gaming Research Unit and professor of gambling studies at Nottingham Trent University. If you don't know what Nottingham Trent University is, you can Google that too. It's a good university in England. So, and then we look at the date here, November 11th, 2014. So it's not super recent, but that might be okay because I don't imagine that the research on video games and the cognitive benefits changes all that rapidly. I could be wrong about that. Now, when I look through this, one of the things that I notice is that the language is pretty clear and understandable. I'm also noticing that there are some hypertext links, and when I click on those links, it takes me to, look at more research. So here we have an actual, this looks like it might be a press release from the American Psychological Association, definitely a well-regarded piece of information here. So that could prove useful. If I had more time, I could look at all of these hypertext links and see if that leads me to even more information. I like that this source is providing evidence of studies, again, more links to these studies. I like that also this author is establishing his own credibility in my own papers. And if we click on this link, we can see, and we saw from the bio that he is a well-regarded, or he's an expert. He works at a university. This is being a little bit slow to load, but we would see if we looked more carefully at that, this is somebody who's published quite a lot of research in scholarly journals. Oh, there it is. There is his CV with links to all of his published research. It's pretty impressive. So in addition to publishing this article in this mainstream newspaper, he's also published a lot of scholarship in these journals written for experts. We're going to come back to that in a minute. So I like this source for the kind of research that I might do in college because it's written by an expert. It's clear and understandable. It's got a lot of possibilities for other sources that I might look at, and it gives me a lot to think about. Let's take a look at the next source I asked you to read, from selfgrowth.com, The 10 Benefits of Video Games, by Timothy Rudin. So first of all, let's figure out what selfgrowth.com is, the online self-improvement community. If we click on that link, this is its home page. It wants us to join. That's the first thing. It looks like it has a lot of advice. in these very, in a whole broad range of areas. I'm looking to see if there is an About section where we can find more information. That is something you should absolutely do when you're looking at a web source that you don't know. Look to find out more information about what it is and what purpose it might have in trying to communicate with you. So Timothy Rudin, if we look at the bottom, we have his bio. He's a writer for free online games, the premier website to find flash game, free flash games online, and so on. So clearly this is somebody who has an interest in telling us that video games are good. It's good for him if we think video games are good. So let's look at this list. Like the last site, like the Washington Post article, this also has hypertext links. So let's take a look at where this goes. It goes to more sites within selfgrowth.com. So it looks like the links are just designed to create more traffic within the website. Now here's our list of 10 benefits of video games. I actually think this is the kind of list that could be really helpful to you in the beginning of your research, right? So this list kind of reminds me a little bit of a Wikipedia article. You've probably heard that Wikipedia articles are not good for college research, but actually at the beginning stages, they can be a really great way to get to know the topic, get to know some of the discussion surrounding your topic. So looking through this list might trigger some ideas for you about ways you could narrow down your topic even more. Because usually in college research, when your topic is really narrow, you can focus and dig deep, and that's a good thing. It even refers to the same author who wrote the previous article. So it does refer to one expert, although he isn't very specific here. Wrote in a medical journal. It doesn't give us a link to that journal. It doesn't really cite that source very specifically. You might have also noticed missing commas here. You've certainly noticed that this isn't very much depth, right? This is a short source, so there's not a lot of substance here. So what I would say about this source, as some of you noted in your posts, is that this might be a good place to get started to get ideas, but I would not want you to use a source this short and this poorly written for an actual college research paper. Again, for every research task you do, you're evaluating your goals, your purposes, and you're thinking about how the source fits in to those goals and purposes. I would say that this, again, might be a good way to get the lay of the land, but not a good final source to use in a paper. Finally, let's look at this source, the benefits of playing video games. We have these authors who are affiliated with a university far away. We learn a little bit more about where they're published, in this case by looking at the footer. This is published again in January 2014 in a publication called American Psychologist. These here are signs that this is a scholarly journal article. We'll come back to that later. Okay. So what we have at the beginning of this source is an abstract that tells us, that basically summarizes the source. This is a great tool to use when you're looking at an article like this, because you can just read this part and decide whether you want to keep reading. Some of you have commented in your post that this is a little bit harder to read. Some of the language is written for experts. This isn't as jargony as a lot of scholarly journals are, but it still does have some scholarly terms, some psychological terms in it that you might not be familiar with. And that's because these are all experts, these are all professors at a university who are writing for other professors. Scholarly journals like this are generally written for other experts in the field and researchers, like college students, who may be wanting to know more. We can see that there's a lot more depth here, right? A lot more information to draw on. Sometimes scholarly articles like this have charts and graphs. And here at the end, one sure sign that you're looking at a scholarly or academic article is this very long list of references. You see that? they have done their research, just dozens and dozens of sources that they read and used to be able to write this 10-page, 8-page article. This looks like an excellent source for college research, even though it might be a little more difficult to read, it might demand more of your time. Okay, so let's go back to this slide here. Oops. The difference between scholarly sources and general sources. So for scholarly sources, also called academic or peer-reviewed, like that last one we looked at, these are typically found in academic journals, written, published by very specific fields in academia, like economics or biochemistry or composition studies or 18th century literature. There are very specific journals for very specific academic fields. Their purpose is to advance knowledge, to inform us and to persuade us in some cases, but generally they want to advance knowledge. These are non-profit publications, so you don't see advertisements. The authors, as I mentioned earlier, are experts. They're typically professors at universities, they're scientists, they're medical doctors who have been studying the area that they are publishing about for years. And again, their audience is other experts and researchers who want to know more about their topic. Generally, you're not going to pick up a scholarly journal article when you're waiting in the dentist's waiting room. The conventions, let's go back. The conventions. So as I mentioned before, you usually see elevated language with a lot of jargon that's discipline specific. So other experts are going to understand it. It can be easy to get intimidated by that. And sometimes the jargon is so intense that it's really not going to help you to try to read the article. Some scholarly articles are just sort of above a general audience like us. They also have careful citation of sources and a long list of references, because in academia, that's what we expect. We expect you to cite sources carefully. Articles are longer and more detailed. And they're also, as it says up here, peer-reviewed. This means that they go through a very rigorous publication process, pre-publication. They're reviewed by other experts, their peers in the field, to make sure that the information stands up to the highest standards of the discipline. So for that reason, they're very reliable. On the other hand, here we have general sources. And this is what most of us look at when we're browsing the news. This is what we would see in a grocery store at the checkout aisle or in a waiting room. A lot of the sources that we read are general sources. These can also be really good sources for college research, but you want to look at them a little more carefully because often they have a strong bias. So a journal like, or a magazine or online publication like the Huffington Post would have a left-wing bias. The Daily Caller would have a right-wing bias. Something like Greenpeace would have a pro-environmental bias, and so on. You want to pay attention to what that is. The authors are journalists and sometimes experts. Remember that Washington Post article that we looked at is written by an expert, right? But he is writing this for a general publication, the Washington Post. So he's not using the same kind of elevated language as he would in a scholarly publication. My little video here is blocking the screen. The audience is general, and the conventions are to have generally more clear, readable language. They're generally written at a lower reading level for a wider audience. These kinds of sources don't typically have a works cited list, and they're much shorter. So these can be good sources, but you need to evaluate them much more carefully in your research to be sure that they are going to be helpful and that the information is reliable. Let's look quickly at a source that I linked to in content for this week. This is our library source, and they have some really good information about evaluating sources. Some of this I've touched on. So please read this over more carefully as well. Really great information here. Okay. Finally, if you have any questions about this or anything else, I've put the email addresses for me and Professor Condon. Don't forget about our virtual office hours and asking questions and discussions as well. Okay. That's all for this video. I'll see you in our discussions soon.